Pushkin. Hey, Leon here. Before we get to this episode, I want to let you know that you can binge the entire season of Fiasco, Benghazi right now, ad-free, by becoming a Pushkin Plus subscriber. Sign up for Pushkin Plus on the Fiasco Apple Podcast show page or visit pushkin.fm/plus. Now, on to the show. Please note, this episode contains descriptions of violence some listeners may find disturbing. Previously on Fiasco.
The Arab Spring had arrived in Libya.
They were saying, wake up, Benghazi. This is the day you are waiting for.
It's not usual to send in a diplomat and basically say, make your way.
I was very worried about his security.
6 months after the uprising, Libya is flooded with weapons and faces a potential power vacuum. The country is now at risk of being taken over by extremists.
You Americans need to watch out because the people who you're dealing with are not your friends.
Man plus X equals Islamic terrorist. Islamic terrorist minus X equals man.
But what is X?
You're listening to a scene from a low-budget movie called Innocence of Muslims. It's not even really a movie. Technically, it's a 14-minute trailer for a movie that was never released. The trailer was posted on YouTube in July of 2012.
Muhammad is Allah's messenger, and the Quran is our constitution.
The Innocence of Muslims video is a crude piece of anti-Islamic propaganda. In it, the Islamic prophet Muhammad is played by a boyish white actor, and he's depicted as a charlatan, a womanizer, and a bloodthirsty tyrant.
He kills men, captures women and children, and what's more, he does this all in the name of God. What God is this?
The video was produced in California by an Egyptian-American man named Nikula Baseli Nikula. He said he made the film in protest of violence perpetrated around the world by Islamic extremists. It was an amateurish production. Nikula used his own house as a soundstage. He hired the actors through Backstage.com and told them they were shooting an epic called Desert Warriors. According to the script he gave them, the film wasn't about Muhammad at all, but just some guy named George. It was only in post-production that the name Muhammad was dubbed in.
Raise him as one of your slaves if you must.
What shall I call him?
His name is Muhammad, the father unknown.
Nikula had his 21-year-old son post the video online. And for a while, it went virtually unseen. Then, about 2 months later, in September of 2012, a new version of the video appeared on YouTube, this time translated into Arabic. Clips from the video aired on Egyptian television, with heated commentary from a pundit who called it unspeakable and asked, how long will I be called a terrorist for growing my beard? The video exploded in Egypt. Political leaders and preachers publicly denounced it, and popular Facebook groups called for protests. As tensions continued to rise, the American embassy in Cairo decided to address the video. Around noon on September 11th, they released a written statement.
Saying, quote, the Embassy of the United States in Cairo condemns the continuing efforts by misguided individuals to hurt the religious feelings of Muslims, as we condemn efforts to offend believers of all religions.
The statement did little to quell the outrage in Cairo. Within a matter of hours, hundreds of protesters had gathered outside the American embassy.
There's a developing story out of Cairo, Egypt. I understand that protesters are outside the U.S. Embassy there. There are about 1,000 of them, and protesters have, from what we understand, stormed the walls of the embassy and pulled down U.S. flags.
Some of the protesters scaled the walls, tearing down an American flag and setting it on fire.
Egyptian riot police are on the scene, and they are trying to protect the walls.
They are protesting a video, they say, defames the Prophet Muhammad.
The Cairo protest was only the latest flare-up in a long-running conflict over the depiction of Mohammed.
Muslim protesters directed more violent anger today against newspapers in Denmark and other European countries that have printed cartoons of Muhammad. From Cairo,
in most Islamic practices, it's considered blasphemous to create any visual representation of Muhammad. Over the years, some self-described secularists have made a point of violating that rule in the name of free speech.
Against cartoons portraying the Prophet Muhammad as violent, womanizing, first published in Denmark and since in 17 other countries.
One of the most dramatic examples occurred back in 2006, after a Danish newspaper published several cartoons of Muhammad, and protests broke out across the Arab world.
There were Muslim protests in at least a dozen countries today.
Now, in Cairo, in 2012, it looked like the same thing again, with Egyptians rising up against a deliberate provocation that had originated in the West. And it was happening on the anniversary of the September 11th attacks, when American embassies across the region were on high alert anyway.
The embassy was closed for business that day as a security measure, and we were working from our compound for the most part.
This is Gregory Hicks. In 2012, he was the deputy chief of the American mission in Libya. Chris Stevens is number 2 at the embassy in Tripoli. On September 11th, Hicks had been left in charge while Stevens took a short trip to Benghazi.
And I remember texting Chris in Benghazi and asking him, "Are you watching what's going on in Cairo?"
Stevens told Hicks he had been unaware of the protests. For all the tensions erupting in Egypt over the Innocence of Muslims video, Libya was quiet.
And then when the sun went down, we were kind of relieved, wiping the sweat off our brows that we had not been targeted in Tripoli and they had not been targeted in Benghazi.
It seemed like the day had passed without incident. Hicks was relieved.
I had basically said, okay, we're good. We're through the day. 9/11 is going to be over. And the only thing that happened was in Cairo. And so I went to watch a television program. And about 9:45 or thereabouts, John Martinick, the RSO, ran up to my room. He's yelling, Greg, the consulate's under attack.
Hicks checked his phone and saw missed calls from both Ambassador Stevens and a number he didn't recognize. He tried to call back, but no one picked up. Then, Hicks got through to Stevens by dialing the unknown number.
And he said, Greg, we're under attack. I think I said, okay, and before I could say anything else, he cut the line.
I'm Leon Neyfakh. From Prologue Projects and Pushkin Industries, this is Fiasco, Benghazi.
I could hear the shots. I can hear the grenades.
I turned to the ambassador and said, I'm going to start shooting, and when I die, I want you to pick up my rifle and keep on fighting.
He's taken to a hospital, and the government won't tell us where he is.
We already got the body. We got the remains.
I thought I was alone. I thought everybody else was dead.
Episode 3, Barefoot, The Attack in Benghazi. We'll be right back.
Chris arrived to Benghazi airport Monday morning. Monday, this is the day, was September 10th. So I was there at the airport to welcome him.
This is Baker Habib. Born and raised in Libya, he started working with the State Department when the U.S. reconciled with the Gaddafi regime. After the Libyan Revolution, Habib became especially close with Chris Stevens, when Stevens was posted in Benghazi as an envoy to the anti-Gaddafi opposition. Now, with Gaddafi gone, Stevens was coming back to Benghazi to check in with his local contacts.
And I remember when I told him, welcome back, and he said, I'm really glad to be back home. So he considered Benghazi as home.
Why exactly Stevens decided to make his trip to Benghazi when he did has never been firmly established. But the general reason was that he understood the city's importance as one of Libya's cultural and political centers. Benghazi was the seat of the revolution that had toppled Gaddafi. If Tripoli was Libya's Washington, D.C., Benghazi was New York or L.A. Stevens believed that the U.S. needed a strong presence there. While in town, Stevens was going to preside over the opening of a kind of study center at a local school that was owned and operated by Baker Habib. It would be called the American Corner. The idea was that Libyans could take English classes there, find information on college admissions in the U.S., and so on. It would be an engine of what some might call American soft power. When Stevens arrived in Benghazi, he and Habib set about finalizing the details for the opening.
I spent all day long with him on Monday. And Tuesday, I went out a little bit. I'm back again. Last time I saw him, it was about 5-ish. He had an appointment with the Turkish consul at that time. So I would say the last time I saw Chris Stevens, I walked with him. It was about 5:10, something like that.
After Habib left, Stevens took his last meeting of the day with a Turkish diplomat at the American compound.
Our compound was in a residential neighborhood, and it didn't look unlike any of the other houses in the area. So about as long as one of their blocks, like a city block almost. It had cement walls all the way around it.
This is Scott Wickland. Trained in the Navy as a specialist in conducting rescue missions, in 2012, he was working for the State Department as a DS agent. DS, short for diplomatic security. On September 11th, Wickland was on day 41 of a 70-day posting at the compound in Benghazi.
We had 4 buildings on it, a little orchard on it. We had a pool. We had a soccer field where the guards would play soccer, and sometimes we would go play with them.
As you heard in episode 2, the American compound in Benghazi had been leased by the State Department after the Libyan Revolution. The 4 structures on the grounds included a barracks for local Libyan guards, a canteen, and a building known as Villa C, where Stevens slept and met with visitors. After Stevens' final meeting of the night, business at the compound began to wind down. Stevens retired to his residence in Villa C. One of his State Department colleagues, an IT specialist named Sean Smith, was in his bedroom in the same building playing a video game called EVE Online and chatting with other gamers. One DS agent was in the compound security center. Scott Wickland and 2 other agents were outside.
At the end of the evening, we were sitting by the pool and talking. I was wearing flip-flops, just kind of relaxing.
Then, a little after 9:30 p.m., Wickland heard a sound in the distance.
It sounded like chanting to me, like a crowd chanting something. I didn't know what it was. And then the sound kind of came nearer and nearer, approaching the compound. And when I made out Allahu Akbar, with our current risk profile, we need to do something.
Wickland and the other DS agents snapped into action.
We're already stressed out because the ambassador is here. It's a dangerous location. It's September 11th. We're on this kind of high alert. We don't know if they're armed. We don't know if they're peaceful. We just don't know. And the automatic response from my end was, I need to go get ready in case. So I turned to the other guys and I said, go get your stuff.
The DS agents who were with Wickland by the pool ran to get their weapons. Wickland already had some of his gear with him, so he took the role of securing Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith, the IT specialist. Both of them were in the living quarters of Villa C, which were separated from the main area by what Wickland describes as a metal jail cell door.
I ran into Villa C and locked the building, ran over into kind of our living area, and I locked this jail cell door. You could stick your arm through the door, but a person could not crawl through.
As Wickland secured the villa's living quarters, he could tell that the group he had heard approaching the compound was breaching the main gate outside. It appeared that most of the Libyan guards on duty had scattered, allowing the attackers to rush in effectively unopposed. Sean Smith tapped out a message to the people he was playing video games with. Fuck, he wrote. Gunfire. Wickland ran into his bedroom and put on body armor and a helmet.
And as soon as I came out of my bedroom, Ambassador Stevens was standing kind of in this common area. He was ready for bed. He was wearing shorts and a white t-shirt. He had his body armor with him and his helmet, and he was kind of finishing putting that on. And right away I told him that we needed to get him in the safe haven. Sean Smith came out shortly after that, and I put Sean Smith in the safe haven, and we sat.
The safe haven was essentially a big closet surrounded by cement walls. Wickland turned off the lights as he ushered Stevens and Smith inside.
There was a sliding door on it that I had opened, and I was kind of kneeling in the entryway of the safe haven, and I had a shotgun, a pistol, and an M4. And I think that this is actually where I kicked off my sandals, because crouching down on sandals, it just wasn't comfortable.
Now barefoot, Wickland steadied his M4 rifle in the darkness of the safe haven and waited. Around 9:45 p.m., Chris Stevens' friend, Baker Habib, got a call from one of the DS agents in the compound. He addressed Habib by the nickname Stevens had given him, Bo.
The diplomatic security agents, one of them, he called me and told me, hey, Bo, we are under attack. So for me, I couldn't process my reaction or couldn't understand at that time what he meant by attack. It cannot be.
Habib didn't want to believe that the compound was under attack, but he knew what he was hearing.
I could hear the shots. I can hear the grenades.
Habib jumped in his car and headed to the compound, where he had been with Chris Stevens 4 hours earlier. From his position in the safe haven, Scott Wickland could hear the gunfire too. He could also hear the attackers begin to hit the main doors of Villa C, trying to break in. Then, suddenly, he could see them.
I could see through the jail cell door into this entryway into Villa C, which is where I saw all the attackers rush in when they finally blew open the doors. I saw them come in the building, and I saw, that they were carrying weapons. I saw AK-47s, the RPG. I saw grenades. I knew that we were in trouble. I was immediately on the radio saying, "Where is everybody? Where is my backup? Where are you guys?" And I had to whisper because people were in the building, and I said, "They're in the building. I need immediate assistance." And I said this over and over, and I didn't hear a response.
There were 4 other DS agents in the compound, but none of them were answering Wickland's calls.
I was scared, wondering if, are the other guys okay? Were they killed? Were they captured? I had no idea.
As the attackers rushed into the villa, Wickland could hear the commotion they were causing. It sounded like they were breaking glass, ripping paintings off the walls, and destroying furniture.
As people started to flood into the building, I start thinking, well, this is it. I mean, it's only a matter of time before they come over and find us. And sure enough, 2 individuals came over to the jail cell door. One of the individuals started fumbling with one of his grenades, and I thought, he's going to blow the locks up with his grenades. And that's when I turned to the ambassador and said, if they blow the locks, I'm going to start shooting. And when I die, I want you to pick up my rifle and keep on fighting.
Wickland trained the sight of his rifle on the chest of one of the men standing at the jail cell door. But he held his fire, figuring that as soon as he pulled the trigger, he would reveal his location to all the other attackers.
Instead of using the grenades, one of the guys uses the butt of his rifle and just kind of bangs on the door a little bit. But nothing happened after that. They turned and walked away. It was a massive sigh of relief for me. I thought, my gosh, maybe we're going to survive. Maybe we're going to be in the clear.
Shortly after that, Wickland saw the attackers start to leave the building, and he breathed a tentative sigh of relief.
What I didn't realize was that they had taken some fuel cans and started pouring it on all those broken frames and the furniture, and they lit it on fire.
The compound had recently acquired a new generator. It was stored near the main gate next to big jugs of diesel fuel. It seemed that before leaving the villa, the attackers had poured the fuel all over the premises.
I got a hint of that smell, and it was smoke. And I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't know, I couldn't see any fire. I couldn't tell it, but I could smell it. And then I knew, well, now we have a different problem on our hands.
From his post in Tripoli, 400 miles away, Deputy Chief of Mission Greg Hicks was trying to get a handle on what was happening in Benghazi. He had spoken to Stevens just after 9:45 p.m., when Stevens told him the mission was under attack. Now, Hicks had to figure out how to help.
First thing I'm doing is, track down all of our embassy leadership people, get them to the operations center, and say, get on the horn with everybody you know and find out what exactly is going on.
Hicks and his colleagues in Tripoli developed a kind of phone tree. Some were trying to reach the DS agents at the compound. Meanwhile, Hicks was communicating with Libyan government officials in hopes of mobilizing some kind of rescue.
I was calling senior officials in the government in Tripoli because they are the individuals who have the responsibility to react. I mean, this was a criminal attack on a diplomatic facility in Libyan territory.
But the process was hampered by the reality of telecommunication in Libya. Service inside the embassy was so unreliable that Hicks and his team had to go outside to their courtyard.
We're all walking around. It's dead dark except for the stars overhead and the lights that are on in our compound. And we're all walking around dousing for telephone signal. When we got the signal, we would immediately start dialing on our phones frantically to try to make the next phone call. And then we would amoeba-like kind of come together and we would share the information that we had gathered. And then we would all spread out again, dousing for signal, and then we would be on the phone again.
It was through these phone calls that Hicks and his State Department colleagues formed a rough understanding of how the attack in Benghazi was playing out.
We heard, it was dozens of armed individuals had entered the compound. Rocket-propelled grenades and rifle fire and things, automatic fire, and was taking place.
As Hicks dialed out, he tried Ambassador Stevens again and again.
I was trying to call him every few minutes and getting no answer. He probably had put his phone on silence to not attract attention to their presence. I don't know, but he'd never answered the phone again.
When he wasn't calling Stevens' phone or his contacts in the Libyan government, Deputy Chief of Mission Greg Hicks was calling the CIA. Specifically, he was calling the station chief at the CIA outpost in Benghazi, a facility known internally as the CIA Annex. It was located less than a mile from the State Department compound.
I was in touch with the Annex chief, so I was talking to him about the security team from the Annex in Benghazi moving expeditiously to rescue our people at our facility.
The Annex was home base for about 24 Americans, including some CIA agents and a team of private security contractors. In an agreement between the CIA and the State Department, those contractors could be tapped to respond to an emergency at the diplomatic compound nearby. That was why Greg Hicks wanted to talk to the station chief.
And I asked him quite pointedly, are you going to be able to meet your obligations under our agreement?
Separately, the contractors at the CIA Annex heard distress calls from the compound. They pulled on their gear, grabbed their weapons, and loaded up into armored cars. But before they could leave, they were held up by the Annex chief. He was in charge of directing the contractors, and for reasons that would later be litigated and relitigated in the media and by Congress, he told the contractors to wait.
I know the Benghazi Annex chief personally, and he's a decent man. He was put in an awful position that night where he had to make choices to risk the people under his authority in his compound to save our people and the consulate.
If the station chief were to send the contractors to the compound, he would be leaving the CIA annex largely defenseless. So, instead of sending his own people out, he tried to reach the leaders of friendly local militias to ask for their help. The contractors got frustrated. They knew that the passing minutes were only giving the attackers an edge. Eventually, a call came on the radio from one of the DS agents at the compound. "If you guys don't get here soon, we're going to die." With that, the CIA contractors broke protocol. 20 minutes after they had first heard about the attack, they left for the compound without the station chief's go-ahead. At the compound, Scott Wickland was adjusting to a new threat: fire.
Yeah, I turned to the ambassador and Sean Smith, and I was like, "Hey, we got to get to the bathroom now."
The idea behind moving to the bathroom was that Wickland, Stevens, and Smith would have access to water there. They could wet a towel and shove it under the base of the door, then open the small window vent and wait out the fire. Wickland figured the villa was made of concrete. The stuff inside of it might catch fire, but the structure itself would not.
I mean, outside, there are attackers. Inside, there's fire. I'm more likely to survive fire if I'm in the bathroom than I am to survive attackers who are outside. I knew that going outside was not an option at all, and so we started crawling.
It was 8 meters from the safe haven to the bathroom, about the length of 2 cars. Wickland strapped his rifle across his chest and began to guide Stevens in a crawl, with his left hand holding the body armor on Stevens' back. Sean Smith followed behind them.
By the time we reached the corner, so 2 meters, the smoke was super thick. I mean, that's how quickly it filled up with smoke. And it wasn't smoke like a campfire. This was smoke like it entered your eyeballs, it went in your mouth, and it was just putrid. It was black, thick smoke that's a mixture of burning rubber and plastic and caustic fumes that just choke you.
Could you see it all?
No, nothing. There was no breathable air from like the ceiling all the way down to, the floor. And so I was like kind of cupping my hands on the floor and breathing, the last inch of air that was left. And that's how I was still talking. And so I was still saying, follow me, and I was hitting the floor. So it would make like a popping noise, and so they could hear me where I was, where to go. And I was just saying, come on, we can make it. Come on, we can make it. Come on. I went at a slow pace, and I could feel Ambassador Stevens on my left side, and then I didn't. I thought, well, he's right there. He's right behind me anyway. No big deal. Like, he can still hear my voice. He can hear my hands. And I was still saying, come on, we can make it. Come on, follow me. Follow the sound of my voice. Follow me. Follow me. And I made it to the bathroom. And they didn't show up. So I started feeling out into the hallway that led to the bathroom to see if I could feel them and pull them in. And I didn't feel anything. I searched until I was like about to pass out. Like, I could feel the lightheadedness and like my body like losing motor skills, and I was really getting scared. At that point, I realized, well, it's either I die here or I go outside.
Wickland knew he could get outside through his bedroom window. He just had to get there. In the darkness, Wickland's rifle had somehow gotten tangled or stuck on the bathroom sink. So he left it behind, stood upright, and ran to his room. Once inside, he felt his way to the window and cranked it open.
Then I kind of collapsed onto this little patio area that I have. And shortly after, it was just gunfire. I mean, I believed it, it was right on my position.
Wickland took cover behind a knee-high wall that surrounded the patio area outside his bedroom. He could feel shards of cement hitting his face from where bullets were making contact around him.
It was just like getting blasted in the face by a shotgun. And so I turned around and went back into the building to search for Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith. I went back in the window and I was just yelling and screaming, hoping that one of the two of them could hear me and keep fighting, like keep crawling towards my bedroom. I was yelling, I'm in my bedroom, follow my voice, follow me. There was like a desk right by my doorway, and I was slamming that thing, hitting it, like, follow me, come to this noise, come to my voice.
Wicklund stayed inside until once again he felt like he was going to pass out. Then he turned around, climbed out the window, caught his breath, and went back in to try again.
I thought, if I turn my lamp on, maybe they'll be able to see it. And so I went over by feel, found my lamp on the side of my bed, turned it on, and I held it up to my face because I couldn't see it. And I remember feeling the heat from the light bulb, and I could just barely make out a light. That's how thick the smoke was.
Wicklund says that each time he went back into the villa, he could only stay for about a minute. Eventually, he knew he couldn't go back in at all. He was also certain that by this point, after spending so much time inside the burning building, Chris Stevens and Sean Smith had to be dead.
My body didn't have any energy left, and I had been breathing in that smoke. Oh man, it just makes me sick thinking about it. I knew that if I went in one more time, that would have been it. I wouldn't have been coming back out. I wouldn't be able to help out anybody if I was another casualty. So I made the decision to climb up the ladder from the patio up to the roof.
It's worth underscoring that in that moment, climbing up onto the roof of a burning building felt like Wicklund's best option.
It was like a frying pan. It was so hot.
Wicklund pulled the aluminum ladder up behind him and took stock of his surroundings. Perched up on the roof, he now had a slightly better sense of what was going on around him. He tried again to reach the other DS agents who had been in the compound with him when the attack started.
The first thing that I did was I got on the radio and I was like, where the fuck is everybody? And I said, Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith are still in the burning building. I need immediate assistance. And there wasn't a response. Nobody got over the radio and said, yeah, we're coming to help you out. It was just silence. I thought I was alone. I thought everybody else was dead. I thought the other agents were dead. And I had blisters in my throat and in my mouth. My feet were pretty messed up. My breathing was pretty bad. And so I developed a plan, and my plan was that I was going to jump off the roof without shoes, and I was going to run to the edge of Benghazi. I was going to steal a car and drive it to Egypt. And that was my real plan.
While Wicklund imagined ways of getting away from the compound, Baker Habib, Chris Stevens' friend and colleague, was desperate to get in.
I want to be inside the compound by hook or by crook. This is my aim at that time. I just want to be there.
As Habib drew closer to the front gates, he was stopped by a group of armed men.
So there, I found 2 cars, 2 trucks, with heavy machine guns. And I told them I just wanted to go in. They said, no way, you can't.
Habib didn't know who these men were, or whether they were working with the attackers. Either way, they had closed off the street. So Habib turned his car around and drove to the back of the compound, which looked out onto a lively street where people had been dining when the attack began. Habib got out of his car and tried to get a sense of the scene.
I could hear clearly grenades and number of shots, and grenades again. The count between the grenades, I will say 1-2 minutes maximum.
As Habib stood near the back of the compound, a man carrying a missile launcher approached him and asked if he was a civilian. Habib told him that he was and said,
I need to go to the building. I have to be there. He said, it's danger. I said, no, let me do it.
Eventually, Habib left his car and began to walk back around to the front of the compound.
What I saw is people with guns, people without guns, and many people. You cannot imagine. This was like a flow. It was like a stream. People getting in the gate. It's unbelievable. The scene was unbelievable. And no one knows what was going on at that time.
The flood of people Habib was seeing had shown up at the compound after word of the attack spread around Benghazi through text messages, Facebook pages, and phone calls. It was hard to tell who was an attacker and who was just a rubbernecker trying to see what was going on at the American mission. Later, this ambiguity would determine almost everything about how the attack in Benghazi was initially misunderstood in the United States. Up on the roof, Scott Wickland didn't know what time it was or how long it had been since he gave up on trying to find Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith. After a while, though, it seemed like the attackers had moved away from his position, creating an opportunity for him to escape.
And I thought, well, this might be my time pretty soon to carry out my plan. Then I got a call over the radio, and it was Dave Ubben.
Dave Ubben was another DS agent and Wickland's friend from training. The two of them had been out by the pool together when the attackers first arrived at the compound. They hadn't seen each other or spoken since.
Dave called and basically said, Scott, are you alive? I called back and I was like, yes, I'm still alive. I'm still here. Where are you guys? I need some help. And they said, we're coming.
Wickland says the other DS agents came to the side of Villa C where he was hiding and signaled to him. Wickland, still barefoot, climbed down the ladder and told them he thought Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith were still inside the building.
When I see them, it's like, oh my gosh, I might survive. I might survive this because I now have my teammates. I'm not alone anymore. That was the big thing for me was I thought I was alone like this entire time. I thought it was just me. Right away, they were jumping in the burning building to try and find Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith.
As the other DS agents took turns entering the building, they were joined by the team of private contractors from the CIA annex. After a firefight on their way into the compound, the CIA contractors had managed to scare off some of the attackers, at least temporarily. Now, they joined in the desperate search for Stevens and Smith, entering the villa through the window Scott Wickland had identified, doing a lap inside as long as they could stand it, and circling back out again. Finally, one of the DS agents found Sean Smith. He was dead, apparently of smoke inhalation, and the agent pulled his body out of the villa. It wasn't long after that it seemed like the fighting might start up again.
We start feeling pressure from attackers again. There's people who are kind of hiding out at one of the gates. And so we're starting to feel like, we have to get moving. We have to get out of here before there's a second attack.
Though they still hadn't found Stevens, the DS agents and the contractors decided it was time to evacuate to the nearby CIA base. The DS agents went first, packing into one of the armored vehicles that was kept at the compound. Despite his condition, Wickland got into the driver's seat. He had been in Benghazi the longest, and he knew the way to the annex. Meanwhile, the CIA contractors loaded Sean Smith's body into the car they'd arrived in. After beating back another advance from the attackers, they pulled out of the compound too. It was 11:17 p.m., about an hour and a half after the attack first started. Wherever Ambassador Stevens was now, it wasn't with the Americans. Baker Habib worried that his friend had been kidnapped.
At that time, I was in contact with those people who got Sean Smith's body. I thought Chris was out of the compound at that time. So you see, it just came to my mind that Chris would be tortured first, then he killed by them, and everything is just in my mind. So that time was terrible.
At the embassy in Tripoli, Greg Hicks had been trying to solicit some kind of help from somewhere before another wave of attacks could hit the Americans. At what point were you told that basically there wasn't any help coming from outside of Libya?
That was AFRICOM telling the defense attaché that they had nothing available to send. And that happened at about 11 p.m.
AFRICOM is part of the Department of Defense. It's responsible for American military activity in Africa. On the night of the attack, AFRICOM told Hicks that the nearest military resources were fighter planes stationed in Aviano, Italy. That was at least a 2 or 3 hour flight from Benghazi. On top of that, there were no tankers available for the planes to refuel.
Essentially, that's why there was no military response, because the military wasn't ready for any eventuality on 9/11.
It appeared that the Americans' only option was to launch a rescue mission from Tripoli. So, a team of private security contractors based in the capital boarded a flight to Benghazi. We'll be right back. Even after the Americans evacuated the Benghazi compound, the large crowd of Libyans Baker Habib had seen nearby continued to grow.
So you see, many people just coming and keep coming to the American mission because people was curious to know what was going on at that time and what happened. Many of them just was to be there with their cell phone to just record what was going on.
What you're hearing is a cell phone video recorded by a man named Fahd al-Bakoush, who later shared his footage with American news networks. Some people looted the compound, taking everything from television sets to coils of rope. One guy even picked up a container of chocolate syrup and walked through the compound, squirting it into his mouth. Then, around 1 o'clock in the morning, someone found a man in Villa C. He was unresponsive and covered in soot. In the cell phone video, you can see a group of people pull the man's body out of the villa. You can hear them yelling in Arabic, "He's alive! He's alive!" Later, some American commentators would say the Libyans dragged the man through the streets. In reality, they immediately brought him to the Benghazi Medical Center, and within 15 minutes, he was in a hospital bed. Soon after, the American embassy in Tripoli received a call from Scott Wickland's phone. It was the same number that Greg Hicks had reached Chris Stevens on earlier in the night. But this time, it wasn't Stevens on the other line. It was a man speaking Arabic, saying he was at the hospital with someone who looked like the ambassador. Hicks and his colleagues pressed the man for something more concrete, but he would not provide a photograph or any other confirmation.
We were very, very focused on asking the kinds of questions that would reveal whether we were talking to a friend or an enemy.
The Americans felt like they couldn't take any information at face value. It was more than possible that Wickland's cell phone had been stolen from the compound, and that the attackers were now trying to lure them into a trap.
Then this whole confusing conversation begins where we understand he's taken to a hospital, and the government keeps telling us, well, we know he's safe, and we keep going, where is he? And they won't tell us where he is. So our view is that he's a prisoner and not in a safe place.
Baker Habib, who was in touch with State Department officials, volunteered to go to the hospital and see for himself if the man was Chris Stevens. But he was told he couldn't go. It turned out there was intelligence saying that because of his close association with the Americans, Habib might be a target too.
So I told them, how about sending someone I trust and someone who knew Chris Stevens very well? He could go there without any problem.
So that plan was set in motion. And after a while, Habib's friend called him from the hospital.
So he called me back and told me that I'm next to him. Yes, he's Chris Stevens 100%.
Stevens was dead. Habib's friend said someone needed to come get his body from the hospital. and Habib told him he was on his way. Chris Stevens was reported killed in action at 4:15 a.m. By that time, the Americans who had gathered at the CIA base, including Scott Wickland, his fellow DS agents, and the CIA contractors, had all spent hours bracing themselves for another attack. Though locals didn't officially know where the CIA annex was, it was possible that someone had tracked the Americans as they made their way there from the compound. There had been several moments while Wickland was driving to the annex when he thought someone was following him. When he got there, the tail was gone, but he and the other Americans wanted to be ready for the worst.
We prepared by putting people up on the roof and making sure that they were armed. We had people monitoring to make sure that we could see these people, and I stayed inside, just trying to kind of recuperate a little bit.
Were you able to get medical attention at that point?
I mean, there wasn't a whole lot that we could do for me. I got some shoes, which was great.
Soon enough, it turned out Wickland and the others had been right to worry. Whoever was trying to expel them from Benghazi had figured out where they were. Aided by night vision goggles, the Americans prevailed in 2 brief firefights. But everyone was dreading the sunrise, when light would give the attackers a clearer view of the CIA base. At 5 a.m., reinforcements finally arrived from Tripoli. Among them was a CIA contractor named Glenn Doherty, who joined a number of others, including a contractor named Tyrone Woods, on the roof of the main building. As the sky began to turn from black to deep blue, the plan was to get every American out of Benghazi as soon as humanly possible. But then...
was I expecting mortars? No, I was not expecting mortars. And I definitely wasn't expecting the accuracy of the mortars.
In the space of 90 seconds, 6 mortars hit the Benghazi CIA base. 3 of them exploded on the roof of the main building, where most of the Americans were hiding.
I was standing right below the ceiling of where they're impacting. But I think the heaviest part of the entire experience was knowing that, I have some friends up on that roof. And I don't know why they're not answering the radio call. I don't know how they're doing.
Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods were both killed in the explosions. Another CIA contractor, Mark Geist, and Scott Wickland's friend, Dave Ubben, were critically injured. After that, the attackers seemed to withdraw, and the Americans prepared to leave Benghazi. At the airport, the plane that the Tripoli team had used to get to Benghazi was still sitting on the tarmac. It was too small to fit everyone who needed to evacuate, which meant that those needing immediate medical attention, including Scott Wickland, were sent ahead. In the meantime, one of Wickland's fellow DS agents called Baker Habib to update him on the situation. A group of Libyans the Americans trusted had gone to the Benghazi Medical Center to retrieve Stevens' body.
I was on my way to the hospital. Then I received a call from one of the DS. And he said, Bo, don't go to hospital. He said, why? He said, we already got the body. We got the remains. Just come straight forward to the airport.
When Habib arrived at the airport, he said goodbye to his friend.
He was there at the airport. He's in front of me, lifeless. And he was there. In the city he loved, to support, to back up, and to open their gate to the United States. So I spoke to him. I told him, Chris, whatever it takes, I will do my best to bring those criminals to justice.
Other Libyans who had known Chris Stevens during his time in Benghazi came to the tarmac as well. Many of them were in tears, aware that the American evacuation probably meant the end of the U.S. presence in Benghazi. Greg Hicks was aware of it too.
I distinctly remember arguing that if we leave, then we've lost. They win. That was the purpose of the attack, was to chase us out of the country. So my view was that we needed to take some time, regroup, rebuild, and then continue our job.
The Libyan Air Force provided a cargo plane for the remaining Americans. The bodies of Ambassador Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty were loaded in as well. After a stop in Tripoli, Scott Wickland and the others boarded a plane for Europe.
We loaded up on the plane, and there were 4 coffins. You know, everybody's looking at these coffins and at these people and silently trying to figure out what just happened.
On the next episode of Fiasco, the attack in Benghazi enters the bloodstream of American politics.
It took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
For a list of books, articles, and documentaries we used in our research, follow the link in our show notes. Fiasco is a production of Prologue Projects, and it's distributed by Pushkin Industries. The show is produced by Andrew Parsons, Ula Kulpa, Sam Lee, and me, Leon Neyfakh, with editorial support from Sam Graham-Felsen and Madeline Kaplan. Our researcher was Francis Carr. Our score was composed by Dan English, Joe Valley, and Noah Hecht. Additional music by Nick Sylvester, Joel St. Julian, Billy Libby, and Little Cheddar Studios. Our theme song is by Spatial Relations. Audio mix by Rob Byers, Michael Rayfield, and Johnny Vince Evans. Our artwork is by Teddy Blanks at Chips NY. Copyright counsel provided by Peter Yassi at Yassi Butler, PLLC. Thanks to archive.org, Julianne Himmelstein, Mike Clark, David Kirkpatrick, Fahd Al-Bakoush, Angela Giordani, and Mitch Zuckoff. Special thanks to Luminary. And thank you for listening.